guys, I'm Zoe Cross.
I'm Riley Nelson.
And this is our first podcast episode of Into the Oasis. Would you like to introduce yourself, Professor David Salem?
I certainly will. Hello everybody, I'm David Salem and I teach a couple classes in CCJS. I have been a federal prosecutor for over 30 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Greenbelt, Maryland, and just recently retired. I spent after graduating law school, the first about year of my career at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and then about 7 years after that with the Central Intelligence Agency. So I've had a pretty broad and unique federal government career. And the nice thing about Greenbelt, when I started there, is that we're generalists. So there are no cases you need to specialize in. You could do just about everything that we would practice in criminal law in the federal system. So it's really kind of a unique 30-year experience that I ended up having.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for telling us about that. So let's just dive right into our questions for you.
Sure.
What are some of the most common online crimes happening today, and how do you think that they differ from traditional crimes?
Okay, well, one thing I ought to talk about for just a second is that the last few years of my career, I have spent a little bit more on the cybercrime side, although I don't pretend to be an expert in it. So I do have a little bit of background in that, and in any event, the answer to your question is that there's a lot of cyber fraud out, especially now. I think vishing with a V is one of the major ones. There's a lot of voice phishing where people will pretend to be grandsons and others,
especially with the deep fakes.
Yes, yes, and so that's that's out there now. As is sextortion, which I'm sure a lot of college kids get caught up in, and so you're probably aware of it.
Yeah.
And I think that the most unique aspect of trying to deal with this type of fraud is traceability. I guess it's the ability to find who's behind it, and to be able to nab them, and that is a challenge for law enforcement.
Yeah, especially with technology evolving.
Yes.
So how do you think that the rise of social media and kind of digital platforms has contributed to this increase in online crime that you're just talking about?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that is pretty much what I just mentioned. That is, it fosters anonymity. So your actors are out there, and especially on the dark web where you just don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And when you even can find out that somebody's actually been scammed trying to get to the bad guy or bad people, it's a very difficult task.
Yeah, absolutely. I could definitely see that. I mean, I have a hard enough time finding people online, and I'm just looking at my friends. So how are law enforcement agencies going about tracking these online criminals, and then what are specific challenges in handling these crimes?
So, law enforcement, I know, is keeping databases now on individuals and groups that are involved in cybercrime, and I think the challenge is part of this, which is that a lot of these crimes originate overseas.
Yeah.
And so there's an international component to this, and it becomes very difficult without cooperation among other law enforcement agencies in foreign countries, and the laws that they have and that we have in sharing information to actually track these people.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of with undercover work and, experts, what is the biggest challenge there?
So I think obviously infiltrating an organization is always difficult. It's not only a hard thing to do from a procedural perspective, trying to get into these groups, but also it's dangerous for the people who do it. So that's one aspect of undercover work that I think is difficult. And then the question is, when you have these groups that are planted in various areas, how do you get people inside them? And if you do that, where do they come from? Who are they cooperating with? And how are we going to get assistance here in the United States?
Yeah, I could see that.
Do you use international law for that at all?
Well, international law itself Kind of. You know, I think the biggest aspect of this are mutual legal assistance treaties from between the United States and other countries, and so and they do involve international law. There's sharing, and you know, obviously when you do one of these treaties, you know, the other country sort of has to be agreeable to helping out, and not, they can't be compelled to help out. And so that's the best way, I think, to you know, attack this through mutual legal assistance treaties. And the problem is, of course, with some of them, with some of these actors, we don't have MLATs, as they call these treaties, with those countries. North Korea, some of the former Soviet Union states, you know, Iran. And so, you know, when we're trying to investigate crimes that are occurring in those places, it becomes that much more difficult.
Do you see a future where those kind of countries could work together towards an end goal, or do you think that's an unrealistic idea?
You know, I like to come from the standpoint of being optimistic. So the answer is, I would like to see a future. Whether it actually happens, you know, especially when you see the divisiveness that's out there now, it would be, I think, something that'll be difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially for countries that don't necessarily have any true alliance with us, like how you were saying with North Korea, Russia, and China. They have no sense of obligation to help us at all solve any type of crimes.
Right.
So I feel like that not only is detection a huge challenge that you were discussing, but also having that collaboration, the international collaboration, because people are not obligated to help.
That's right, absolutely. So, you know, this becomes a very thorny problem that we've had some success working with other countries, but you know, you can imagine there are a lot of players out there who we never catch.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of going back to AI and deepfakes and stuff, and just online information and evidence in general, how is that evidence preserved in court and like kind of obtained?
Okay, so preserving it, you know, we could preserve it electronically. Okay. So, I mean, to the extent you can print something out, of course,
right.
You know, there are rules about what is the best evidence and what isn't. I think the biggest issue, and you touched on it, is obtaining it. So, you know, when you think about emails on the dark web, for example,
right.
The dark web is set up so that the senders and recipients are typically, again, anonymized. So the servers operate on the dark web so that they are like relay stations that encrypt where the information is coming from. And, you know, if you have a, you know, an incriminating email and you'd like to use it, then the question is, like, can you prove that your defendant sent it? And sometimes that's difficult. So obtaining the information, I think, is going to be the big problem.
Absolutely. Can you share an example of a case where online crime led to an unexpected or groundbreaking legal precedent?
You know, so there are a couple of things to say. So there is, and I wish I had written it down in terms of the actual name of the statute, but I know California's recently passed a law that's going to require companies using AI, especially in ads and stuff, to, I guess the right word would be to watermark their AI so that you can tell whose it is, and so it'd be very difficult to copy. But California's alone in that, and as far as I know, nobody else has done that. One other, like, more negative aspect is the January 6th issue that came up. The crimes were not online, but a lot of the evidence was collected online because people were using social media to either voice their support or indicate that they were, you know, participants. And so a lot of that information was useful. And a lot of what was prosecuted at the lower levels of underneath seditious conspiracy and stuff were obstruction of justice. That statute was very broad and allowed for the government to punish people who not only, let's say, you know, threw papers in the shredder that were important, but also, you know, like broke a window or kept somebody from voting. And a law came out, actually a Supreme Court case came out, the Fisher case, after a lot of these obstruction cases were charged and people were convicted under them, and said basically that statute's too broad. So now unless you take paper and destroy the paper the way we used to use it, like being on site at the Capitol, and breaking down a door and trying to prevent the vote for the president was considered obstruction. Now it's not. So that's sort of a negative legal precedent that came out of that, and not all of that, of course, was cybercrime, but enough of it was that it sticks in my head now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So it has to be the physical destruction of something in the office.
Yes.
Okay, I see. I get it. That's an important distinction.
Yes, a very important distinction.
Yet the outside of the building doesn't count?
Yeah, no, it doesn't look like, breaking a window or defacing the outside of a building or, standing in the way of somebody actually casting a vote is not going to qualify now. Maybe it's something else, and I'm sure we'll look for other statutes to use, but what used to be the obstruction of justice statute under 18 U.S.C. 1512 can't be used anymore for that. So.
That's very interesting. Going back to the AI thing, actually, I think something just passed for Maryland state employees about their use of AI as well.
Okay,
because I got an email about that.
And you have to stay up on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's
so I don't pretend to be.
It's always evolving, but I just thought that was interesting.
So we ought to switch now. I'll ask the questions, you give the answers.
Yeah, the January 6th example is perfect because there's all the cyber crimes that came from the extremist theories online and QAnon and everything kind of just jumbled up in that. And then I remember when things were being posted online with like people's faces trying to find the people. But yeah, that's absolutely a negative consequence of.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, but right now that's where we stand.
Absolutely.
Do you foresee that changing at all?
Is there
any type of statute that any type of event would occur where that obstruction of justice would be changed again?
So, I mean, that's a good question. I think the answer, when you figure something gets to the Supreme Court leading to an unexpected decision by them, which this was, I think it becomes hard to simply see a day in a specific single instance that's going to make them, reverse themselves, and I just don't see that happening. So, 1512 is now going to be pretty much limited to records, and the best thing we can hope for maybe is there's a Congress that somehow sees fit to punish people who do things other than destroy records, especially if there is a possibility of an insurrection, and pass another statute. That won't be an easy thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So kind of switching topics onto the dark web and different kinds of scams. What exactly is the dark web, and how does it differ from the surface web that we use every day?
So the dark web, I'll explain, I guess there are three webs really in the end, but I'll explain the other two in a minute. The dark web is basically a secret place. The whole idea of the dark web is the installation of a platform that allows anonymous communications. And it's been mostly a marketplace for criminal activity. Not always, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the surface web is what I guess everybody really knows. It's like using Google, it's a .com, .net, that type stuff. And then there's, in the middle, between the surface web and the dark web, there's this thing called the deep web. And the deep web is really a part of the surface web, if you will. It's just that you need a password or some other manner of getting into those. So it's like your credit card accounts, your bank information. Well, you can Google the bank, and that's a surface web thing. But if you want to see your particular information, you need a layer of protection, and those passwords or fingerprints or Face ID, those things will allow you to get access to that. So the deep web is out there too, and I suspect it's it's probably a small portion of the surface web. But the dark web was actually a U.S. government-sponsored creation. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I think back in the 90s, and I believe it was defense-related agencies that created it. Wow. And so it got away, and this platform called Tor, T-O-R, was a way that individuals who wanted to participate on the dark web could communicate with others. And so when you think about it, if you are sitting at a computer in your house, and I'm communicating, let's say, with you at a computer in your house, we each have an IP address that, if something were to go wrong, law enforcement could come look at the IP addresses and know at least the computers in each of our houses communicated with each other. Exactly who was online may be a different issue. But with Tor, you can't do that. So the relays encrypt the IP addresses, and so you don't end up being able to see who actually sent it. Legally speaking, it's useful, and was useful, and still is useful, for individuals like journalists in countries that are repressive, or dissidents in countries that are repressive, for them to communicate with each other and not essentially get caught and get in trouble by those governments. So that's out there. Whistleblowers could use it in theory. So that's out there for them to use, and of course that would be a legitimate use of the dark web. But ultimately it became a place of like a bazaar for criminal activity, whether it's human trafficking or cryptocurrency scams or even hitman scams and drug trafficking as well. So, yeah.
How do basic people like you and I, those that are more vulnerable to radicalization, how do they obtain access to the dark web? Like, where is that something that someone can just find out of nowhere?
I don't think you can do it. I think you've got to have the access to the platform. And I don't know if I'm not being an expert on the dark web. I have never worked undercover in that way. So I imagine you have to obtain Tor or some similar form if there's something else out there like that. And then either have access to it, download it or whatever, so that you can then participate on the dark web. And the one case we did in my office involved Freenet, which is a form of it's a chat room on the dark web, and people were sharing child pornography on it. So obviously you don't want to know, if you're in that chat room, you don't want people to know, that you're involved or what you're selling or looking at. So, you'd need that special access.
So is that special access, is that a relatively difficult procedure to be able to have access to that?
I'd say that's a good question. I imagine it's not something you can simply look up and download.
You probably have to know someone that, or know of someone or know someone that knows someone.
But I don't know the answer to that specifically, so I would just tell you it's probably not a simple thing, but you can get on the dark web without too much trouble if you want to.
That's crazy. So you kind of already touched on this, but is there anything else that you want to add about what people use the dark web for, illegal activities, what's bought on the dark web besides what you already touched on?
No, not really. I think the drug trafficking, human trafficking, child pornography, cryptocurrency, the one thing that is true about the dark web is that most of the exchanges, like when you're purchasing something, they get done in cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, right? Because
then you can't trace it
correct,
back. Okay,
correct,
how interesting.
Correct. And a lot of the early scams were, sort of Ponzi cryptocurrency scams where people were offered great deals on the dark web. You put your money in today and you get a Bitcoin back, and your Bitcoin will grow like 10 times in the next week. And you put your money in, or your Bitcoins in,
right?
And people just took them and disappeared, and then you can't find out who took it, and so they got away with it. Same thing, in a straight money transaction. You want to buy some drugs, if you're not going to pay cash, but if you're going to pay in some form of currency, the currency would be sent, and the drugs would not come to you, and trying to find out who took your money would be impossible. So.
Can you go over the Ponzi schemes for some of our viewers who might not know what they are?
Sure. Well, a Ponzi scheme originated with somebody named Charles Ponzi back in the early 1900s, and it's I think there are two hallmarks to it. One is sort of less used now, and they still use the term Ponzi scheme. One part is that it generally attracts buyers in waves, so that when people, say, invest, as they did with Charles Ponzi early, and they wanted to see their money, their returns and stuff, he gave some of them actually received their money, and they received the interest that he promised them, but he was really paying them off with later investors' money. And ultimately, the scheme comes unraveled when too many people ask for their investments.
Right.
And the other part of it was the rate of return. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Charles Ponzi promised either a 15 or a 50% rate of return, guaranteed. So if you put in, imagine if you put in $1,500, you were promised $2,250 after, a year or 6 months. And, the markets don't work like that, and there's no way to promise that. And so in the end, if you didn't have $2,250 and somebody demanded their money back at the end of the term, you'd have to come up with the money from somewhere. And you're usually using the later investors to pay off the earlier investors on their principal and interest. And eventually it comes unraveled when you can't get any more investors, and the last set of investors are asking for their money, or or too many people are asking all at once. And Bernie Madoff did the same thing. I mean, he was basically a Ponzi scheme, and his guaranteed rate of return, I think, was 15%. And I don't think you invited me on to, warn your listeners, but ultimately, if the day comes where you're investing and you find some investment advisor who's promising you a guaranteed rate of return, go somewhere else. That's my advice. And so the cryptocurrency scams were like that. You purchase X amount of cryptocurrency today, would guarantee you, 50% rate of return after 3 months. And so you put in your money, 3 months, you get 50% back, but the promise is then to invest that money and get 50% down the road. So you put it back in, and then they disappear with the money. That's it.
I was just actually reading about a celebrity that created their own form of cryptocurrency and then had the same issue because they thought that it was some kind of scheme because people were like investing all this money, and then she just took it out and then didn't say anything else.
Yeah. Well, there's so much. Everything is so fast now that it's very hard to anticipate all the things that can go wrong. And I would say that a lot of these scams have an urgency component to them. So you get that phone call from your grandson, who says he's on the side of the road and the police have just arrested him for something, he needs bail money, and the idea is you need to pay it immediately. Right. Because if you have any time to investigate, chances are you'll find out that this is maybe not legit, and you won't pay it. So that's one of the hallmarks of most of these scams, is some sense of urgency.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big component. Riley, you don't know this. I told Professor Salem this, but last year I got scammed out of concert tickets because they wanted the money. They were like, "Oh, we're gonna sell it to someone else if you don't pay right now," and I paid it. I paid all the money.
So see, there's a lesson learned for all of us.
I didn't get those tickets. They stopped responding immediately after I sent the money.
Well, just so like I have a good friend who I still see every once in a while, even after we both retired, and I got an invite, a dinner invite yesterday, and I tried to open it, it wouldn't open. It indicated that I needed some other platform, like AOL or something, to open it. Was this on
email or
like an email? It was an email, and usually you hit the envelope and it opens automatically. It didn't do that. So I tried it a couple of times on my phone and my computer, and neither time it opened right, and I just thought, I don't know if this is legit. So I wrote back to the address to my friend saying, "Hey, is this legit? Because it doesn't seem like it's working." And I got a phishing email back saying that this was phishing. So I don't think they got anything out of me because I never opened it. Yeah. But even I was a victim, so as early as yesterday. I mean, there's so much going on. It's very hard to. Right. It's very hard to know. And the word simply is always, if you don't recognize it, be really wary about opening it or communicating with it, and certainly don't give out information over text or email.
See, do any of those scams, do they gain anything just from you purely interacting in any form of way, whether it's a text message or an email?
And the answer is, Riley, yes.
Okay.
Because sometimes when you merely interact and answer, like in a text message, they can gather your password. And so, then they can communicate with you or others on your contact list. Like they did with my friend, and somebody maybe responds, and then they get bank information and other things that probably have to put in, personally. But, you know, a lot of people, especially seniors, who get caught up in these things and don't realize what they're doing. So, but there is an aspect to it. That's why if you don't recognize the text of the email, just delete it. Don't even open it to read it, just delete it. And certainly don't open up attachments. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I still ask my mom, I'm like, is this real? And she's like, no, Zoe, that's fake. And I'm like, okay, thank you guys.
It's very nice to have Zoe as a plant.
She should know. I'm surprised you can't recognize it.
Sometimes they look really real. Like, I know I have outstanding balances on the tolls, like when you go, because I drive home a lot. And I keep getting this one about how I have overdue balance on my tolls, and I'm like, I know it's not real, please leave me alone. I know it now, but
I'll get the tolls, I'll get the mail packages.
Yeah, I get all of them
constantly.
Right, and a lot of times you can see the sender has a strange email address. Doesn't look like a USPS address or a FedEx address. It's something different. So again, you know, you see that, just delete it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about the little details in the.
And they're getting better because they can pretty much make the email.
Yeah, they can spoof the
email.
Yeah.
But it's like a letter or a number is just one different.
Right, and that's the big deepfake issue for the future. Is, you know, how good AI is getting.
Yeah,
things.
Especially with the voices. We just released a toolkit that Riley made, and one of our interns, Maya, and it was about deepfakes and AI, and there's a little section where you go through and you click to listen to the voices to determine if they're AI or not, and they're hard.
Yeah.
I played and they're really hard.
Yeah. It's going to get harder. So, you know.
And that's what we were explaining, and we were explaining that it's only going to get more difficult, and it's only going to get even more convincing.
Yes.
Because the current irregularities in terms of like in pitch and in breaths between certain words, they're pretty identifiable right now, and they're only going to get incredibly more harder to differentiate between AI generated voice and then human voice.
Absolutely, and you know, there are little things to, you know, if you can remember to do all these things, you don't open your text, you don't open the emails, and then you may have like a word or an event that you have and share with relatives, so that ultimately, if there is a call that, you know, appears to be from a grandson, and you ask about that event before you pay anything, so that, you know, if they can't repeat it, chances are it isn't legitimate.
Like
but it's hard to
word or a safety phrase.
Safety word or safety phrase, yes.
Yeah.
Hard to remember to do that, and hard for everybody to know it in a moment of, you know, excitement, panic. But it is what, you know, it's the best way to handle it.
That's a good idea. Maybe I'll install that. maybe I'll start doing that.
Well, it's good. You have an example now for yourself that you not only can tell others about, but that will keep you from becoming a victim again.
So true. You know what? You learn the hard way.
Absolutely.
The Sabrina Carpenter tickets were not worth it. But so going back to the dark web, what's a scam that originated on the dark web? And, you know, tell us about how it unfolded. What was the fallout like?
So there are a couple of them, and the famous one is Silk Road.
Right.
And with this guy named Ross Ulbricht. Because, you know, I had class before yours, I think. There were a couple of students there who were just like throwing out podcasts that they wanted me to listen to, usually true crime stuff.
Yeah.
And I can't get used to it because I don't know when is it I can concentrate on that. At night, I think like I watch TV. Or I listen to music. You know, at the gym, it's usually music, right? Because that gets you, you know, going, your metabolism, I guess. But then, you know, a half-hour podcast, which isn't very long, might be really interesting to listen to. But maybe the car, except now I'm not driving to work like every day. So
that's what I was doing.
I listen in the car. I drive a lot. When I drive to my internship, it's usually 30 to 45 minutes. Yeah. But it's, traffic, so it turns into like an hour. Yeah. So I got an hour there, hour back, and then if I'm like walking to class or something, I listen to it then.
Yeah, so I just have to do that more and take advantage of that. I haven't
also,
done that yet.
Like chores.
When I do chores, I
like,
do it too.
If I'm getting ready to go somewhere, if I'm like doing the dishes, like
laundry.
For certain chores that you can't look at something for a prolonged period of time, I'll put a podcast on, that way I can hear it simultaneously that I'm doing activities that I need both my hands and I'm not focused on something that I'm watching.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, because
it's almost like it go by quicker because it's like you're talking to somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
Just music. It's not just like the same thing over and over.
Right.
It's a conversation.
Yeah. I have cleaning chores on
Yeah.
Saturday. So that.
Well,
that
there
would
you
be
go.
good.
You could try it out then. This
Yeah.
will be our recommendation
Okay,
to you.
I'll do that. And I had a whole list of podcasts up to look at. So I'll go back to that and see
Yeah.
what I can
I'm sure that
find.
you have a long list of recommendations that have been given to you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
there's
the
some
next time
good
you
ones.
invite me here, then I can tell you some of the
Oh,
podcasts I
perfect.
listen to.
Yeah, I don't know. I like podcasts, but I try to stay away from a lot of the true crime ones, especially because the same reason for like the Netflix documentaries about true crime is they don't tell the victims' families when they're doing it. I mean, obviously they're not obligated to, their public cases. But something about it to me, I'm like profiting off of that. Something about it doesn't sit right with me. I'm more of like a this is how to improve your life kind of podcast person.
Yeah, and now with this strange amount of free time, I have the opportunity to listen to a whole bunch of different
Yeah.
stuff. So maybe I'll do that too. I had a lot of true crime stuff, and I've been caught up in true crime television watching too.
Oh, yeah.
And the really interesting ones are foreign. It's like Norwegian and Finnish like mysteries and crime stuff. And there are a lot of holes in the way they film it, and
Yeah.
it's not done as well as it is in the United States. So it's fun. It's fun to watch.
That's funny.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the one. There's Anthracite, which I think is Finnish, and there was one called Dear Child,
How
which I think was
interesting.
German. And that one, I hardly even understood that one. That just had
Do
a
you
weird thing
listen
going
to it with English subtitles?
on. It has subtitles.
Okay,
yeah.
okay, I see.
Otherwise, I mean, you could see, in some instances they're speaking English, but it still has English subtitles. But a lot of times they're speaking the foreign language, you can kind of tell.
My friends and I were addicted to those true crime podcasts and documentaries.
Yeah.
Like though some of the documentaries are definitely like exaggerated.
Yeah.
But the ones that we can get as authentic as possible, we'll sit and we'll watch 4 in a row. It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Just like whether it's any type of catastrophic event that's occurring. Like for example, I just recently watched the Netflix Boston Marathon bombing documentary. It was incredibly interesting. I learned so much about it. And then right after that, we watched the Waco documentary.
Oh, the Waco documentary is good, and that was really
it was
accurate.
incredible.
Yeah.
It was incredible because you have people that were there
Yeah,
that somehow got free.
yeah.
It was
It's good when they
Law
like
enforcement
take
you had.
people
Wow.
that were there and
Mhm.
put them into it,
Mhm.
like interview
they
them.
had that one for the Boston Marathon one too.
That's good.
Yeah, I should take a look at the Boston.
Those are really
Marathon one.
interesting.
It was very, very, very interesting. And it-
Netflix?
yes.
Okay.
It shows you every single one of their processes, and like currently I'm diving more into depth with like fusion centers in one of my classes.
Uh-huh.
Oh
And
yes,
so that's
those are
something
cool.
that they used fusion centers during
Yeah.
that.
Did they?
Yeah, but it also like they used fusion centers to catch him, so it was like the first real prominent evidence of fusion centers working and to prevent stovepiping. But they also used that example to say that it also didn't work because Russian intelligence had given us information about the Tsarnaev brothers, but like the U.S. kind of like chucked it away. It's like it's a deep dive not only to the events but to the intelligence behind the events that help solve them. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
That's it. That's the thing. Because if they do a good job, it's fascinating stuff. You get
Yeah.
behind the scenes look. So I'm still stuck on watching as opposed to listening, but I'm gonna, especially Wednesdays now. I have a, half hour, 40 minutes each direction.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that would be a good time to listen to a couple of podcasts.
That would. There's a book that I've been meaning to read that my mom got for me for Christmas, but it's like either How to Kill Monsters or How to Find Monsters, and it's about the guy that started the BAU, and that's also really interesting. The Behavioral Analysis Unit in the FBI. That's also really cool because it's talking about like the psychological intersection of criminal justice and law and how people are motivated to do things and like analysis of victims and then also the perpetrators, and that's really cool. I think you'd like
What
that.
kind of law are you gonna practice? You think?
I don't
You know
know.
yet?
Criminal law, terrorism litigation,
Okay.
maybe juvenile law. Who knows?
Okay. Good.
I guess we'll
Well,
find
you-
out.
Yeah. Well, you have all the time you're in law school. Sometimes you just realize that
Yeah.
this is more for me than
Yeah,
something
exactly.
else. And hopefully there'll be clinics or things.
I was
you
gonna
can
say, I'm
actually get
hoping
involved.
all the schools I'm looking at have really good clinic programs. So
You going to go into law school too? Or?
No, I'm not actually. I'm trying to go into international defense and security for the government.
Okay.
And a new type of defense unit. The CIA actually is one of the ones that currently have in mind. Actually, just yesterday got accepted into the UMD Risk program.
Oh, that's so cool.
I just got it.
And
it's
what is
the Research for Intelligence and Security Challenges.
Okay.
And like kind of requires security clearance so that you're working in actual real projects that the government's working on, and it's basically an incredibly great way to network yourself right after the program to go right into the U.S. government. Like it says that right in the email of my congratulations. It's like you're gonna end up using this to go into the federal.
How long is this internship for?
It's 10 weeks over the summer.
That's great. Good.
Very, very, very excited.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I'll cross my fingers for both of you.
Thank
You
you.
get what you want. The CIA,
Yeah.
I had studied Russian, and I started, believe it or not, in middle school. Well, it was then junior high school.
Wow.
There was a social studies teacher who came from Russia, and she spoke Russian. And the school said if you can, gin up enough students who are interested, then you can teach a class. And so I started in 7th grade.
Where was that when I was in 7th grade?
Yeah, really.
No, so true.
7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and then 4 years of college. And then at the very end of my college career, there was an exchange program that started between Moscow and the United States. And so I went to Moscow State University for about a year. So you think of all the time I spent speaking Russian. So when I came back, so you get a State Department briefing. State Department, right? So you get a State Department briefing. The guy comes, he tells you all about, watching yourself and don't get involved with these groups.
Right.
And if you do, make sure you have your credentials on you, your passport, whatever. And at the end, when you're done, he has one-on-one meetings with everybody. Because only 10 of us would go at a time. So I think I was on the second or third group that went over. So only 20 or 30 of us had gone overall. Same guy. So he has a one-on-one meeting. And I had met a couple of people who I guess he would have preferred I avoided. So when I came back, he's telling me all about this. He said, I know you met this guy in this date, and I know you went to his house, and and so you started to realize, he said, no, that's not the State Department, that's something else.
Yeah.
And so, that led to when I came back and had this debriefing, automatically, like, there were phone calls from the National Security Agency and the CIA to...
See, that's what I want to know. I want to be that spot that can figure that out.
Well, the only reason at the time was language, right? Because I'd been there, I lived there, and I spoke the language, and I spoke it okay at the time. And so, I had...
I'm sure okay is probably an understatement.
Well, I probably wasn't like a native speaker, but I was, reasonably good.
Able to communicate.
Yeah, and so, they asked me, and it just was a hard process to get into it because the polygraph turned out to be difficult for me based on all the contacts I made overseas, and they were they were concerned about people I met and whether I was co-opted, so I had 3 or 4 polygraphs over a few years before they actually said yes, which is why I ended up going to law school and getting through law school before I actually got a job with them.
Wow.
Right? So actually, I said I took a job at the SEC. I started there because I needed a job. I had applied there, and the CIA had just done like the last of a series of polygraphs where they said to me, we think you've passed, but we have to check everything. So I took the job and I thought, we'll see what happens. And then, maybe 5 months later, 6 months later, they said we'd be, we're there you can start with us now. So I just stuck it out another few months at the SEC, and then I started with them. And sure enough, I was stuck in the Soviet Affairs section. So yeah, it was a good job, interesting at the time, and I got involved in some things that were, nice for a young person just starting. And they told me to, you have no experience in litigation, because I wasn't doing anything in law school geared to that. I was all thinking all about international stuff. And they sent me off to do a 2-week video taping thing. Like you pretend trial.
Yeah.
Right? And you just get videotaped and you get critiqued. And at the last minute I couldn't go because somebody else in the office was also out. They didn't want 2 of us out at the same time. And about 2 months later somebody said, this thing will be offered again in about 10 months, but you can go now if you want to a U.S. Attorney's office, do the same thing for real. And I called up Baltimore because it was closer to where I lived, and went there, and my career just completely and really serendipitously just changed completely. And I did other things. And the funny thing I go into the courthouse. Greenbelt opens up a few years after I got into Maryland. And so I'm a part of the group that goes down to the courthouse. And the chief judge is a guy named Peter Vassetti, who just unfortunately passed away. But he was really into international law. And his big set of topics was Portugal and South America, because he spoke Spanish, he spoke Portuguese. But he started to rotate, bringing in foreign judicial and other law enforcement type groups, and he brought Russian and the former Soviet Union states, lots of groups over. So I would he'd ask the U.S. Attorney's Office to give a presentation, so I would use my Russian.
Wow.
For some of that for a while when we first started. Now it's so rusty, I don't even know if I could do it. But so in the end, I had a job which was totally different from anything I ever expected it to be, and then I still had a connection to what I did when I was in college, which meant something to me. So, got to use it. All right, I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's good. See, that'll be in the podcast because that's cool.
That's amazing.
Is that? Well, you're taping?
Oh yeah, I was taping this whole time.
Oh no!
But I'm gonna edit it and cut things.
Okay.
That's fascinating.
Cut the that I was in covert act. Oh, that doesn't matter. I don't think
I'll cut that part.
Care.
Don't worry.
I don't think they care about that. It's what I actually did. But that's how it all worked out. It was a career path I never thought I would take, and never would have the opportunity to do. And I hadn't even taken the bar.
Wow.
So I went to SOVA, the Soviet analysis section, and I think I was there maybe I had taken the bar, but I hadn't heard about passing. I was there maybe a month, 2 months, 6 months, something like that. Maybe it's a year and 6 months, and found out I passed the bar. And so then I contacted the general counsel's office to switch over from SOVA to become a lawyer for them. And then I wasn't doing so much Soviet stuff after that. But it was, I tell my students, be open, keep your eyes open for opportunities,
for anything
because
that's
you never
gonna.
know. You never know.
Should end with. What do you think? Just kind of overall, how do you think that media literacy and people understanding digital education and being aware of what's going on online, being able to critically evaluate sources, information, whatever they're encountering online, how do you think that's important to our national security, our legal system, stuff like that?
Yeah. So I think it's very important because, we've talked about all the pitfalls and how to, try to avoid them. And the thing is, we do so much everyday activity without focus.
Right.
There's things that they're
mindless.
They're mindless, right? And this is how people get caught up in stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because they respond like I did. Open the envelope, right? And to get the invite to the dinner party, and you don't think beforehand about that. And so, I don't want to say so much, but there is a significant percentage of cybercrime, which is performed by state actors rather than individuals. And we've been talking mostly about individuals, but
right.
We have enemies. I think it's fair to say, and those countries are looking for ways, to undermine us.
And the government especially.
Yes, and the government especially. And so, an individual romance scam has probably very little national security implications.
Right.
But if you do enough of them and enough people lose their money, and there's a hue and cry over why the government isn't doing something about it, it becomes potentially a national security issue. So, media literacy and understanding what you're doing is, I try to do and don't always succeed, and you do the same.
Yeah, very true.
Riley's the one who hasn't been able to tell a story yet. So.
I actually don't have one.
Yeah, that's good. So I think that that's a very important part of maintaining not just a healthy and successful life, but also a country that works. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I so agree. I mean, it's very easy, I feel like, to get caught up in the just kind of everything's going fast, especially in today's day and age. Attention spans are shorter. It's
Yeah.
easy to just boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom, and it's
Yeah.
less time slowing down and evaluating what's happening. It's sharing sources quickly because you're like, you see a clickbait title and you share it with your friends, and that immediately starts the spread of disinformation.
Right. And, you all, you and your friends and colleagues and stuff will end up in the workforce in potentially sensitive positions. So when you have
Right.
that mindless response to something while at work, then you have a state actor that infiltrates the computer system when,
Yeah.
it could have been prevented if there was focus at the beginning. That becomes a big deal. So, I wish you guys luck. I'm kind of on the tail end of this, but
Right.
yeah.
I feel like that's definitely a problem, especially for countries that don't necessarily have that cultural mindlessness. And because we have such free access to information,
Right.
that we're able to consume so much and
Yeah.
therefore able to express so much, and certain countries that remain a threat to undermining the US or any type of intelligence that we have, they're the ones that don't necessarily have that same cultural mindlessness.
Right.
So
Right.
they have that over us. In
I
that sense.
agree.
And I suspect, lawyers are going to be important, especially if they, in the end, they have some cybercrime capability if you want to practice criminal law. But I suspect in the end that national security aspect of a career is going to be a real big deal because of, the growth of AI
absolutely.
and how it's used. So you can see that in the silly little things that passed by in the last election, what looked like Biden ads,
Yeah.
telling you to vote for somebody or not vote for somebody that, clearly it's unlikely we did here. That will become really good in 10 years, 12 years, and then ultimately, how do you conduct a fair and free election? If you have outside actors who are able to get on a television or a radio station or just, send something over social media.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Absolutely.
And how do you balance that with freedom of expression?
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I think
Right.
that's the importance of media literacy, is because it's preventative and not reactive, which is what we're doing in sometimes like national intelligence. We're trying to react to these terrorist organizations or this propaganda online. And I feel like media literacy is bipartisan in the sense that it's teaching people how to critically evaluate for themselves and then make a decision on whatever they think it is. But that way it's just educating them into like how to evaluate a source critically. I think that protects the Fourth Amendment, which is I think why media literacy is so important.
Yeah, and being preventative instead of reactive is
Yeah.
a really good point, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all of our questions for you.
Well, I was very glad to be here today, very glad to answer your questions. I would love to be invited back when you have something else you'd like me to talk about, and
Absolutely.
thank you.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.